Hello, this is Natalia. You're listening to English Unlocked. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had a moment when everything in your life looked fine, but inside you felt completely lost? You wake up, you do what you're supposed to do, you talk to people, you answer messages, and still, there's a quiet question inside you. What am I doing with my life? You don't usually say this out loud. You don't want to sound dramatic. You don't want to worry anyone. So you keep going. But the feeling stays. Sometimes it appears in the evening. Sometimes when you're alone. Sometimes when you stop for just 1 second. You think, I thought I would feel different by now. I thought I would be more confident. I thought I would know what I want. These thoughts don't mean something is wrong with you. They mean you're human. A lot of people feel lost. They just don't talk about it. In real life, people don't say, I am lost and confused about my future. They say things like, I'm not sure what's next. I'm figuring things out. I feel a bit stuck. These are very normal English sentences. Simple, honest, and they carry a lot of meaning. When you feel lost, your mind looks for answers, but answers don't always come fast. So you live in between who you were and who you're becoming, between old plans and a clear future. And that space feels uncomfortable. You might look at other people and think, they know what they're doing. But you don't see their doubts. You don't hear their quiet thoughts. Everyone has moments of uncertainty. The difference is, some people talk about it, and some people stay silent. English can help you give words to that silence. Not big words, not perfect sentences, just real language. Language that says, I don't have everything figured out, but I'm still moving forward. You don't need to rush clarity. You don't need to force direction. Sometimes the most honest thing you can say is, I'm taking it one step at a time. And that is enough for today. There is something important people rarely talk about when they feel lost. It's not fear. It's not sadness. It's the feeling of being in between. You are no longer who you used to be, but you're not yet who you're becoming. And this space feels uncomfortable. You might think, I don't recognize myself the way I used to. My old goals don't excite me anymore, but I don't have no ones yet. This is a very honest place to be. In real life, people don't say, I am in a transitional phase of personal growth. They say, I feel different lately. I'm rethinking things. I'm not sure what I want anymore. These sentences sound simple, but they describe something deep. When you're in between, your mind wants clarity. It wants labels. It wants direction. But clarity often comes after patience, not before. Many people try to escape this feeling. They stay busy. They distract themselves. They fill every quiet moment. But the feeling doesn't disappear. It waits because it's asking for attention, not answers, just attention. You might notice that when you finally stop, the same thoughts return. What matters to me now? What do I actually want? What am I afraid to admit? These questions don't need immediate answers. They need space, and space feels uncomfortable when you're not used to it. That's why people say things like, I don't like overthinking. I just want to stop thinking. But thinking is not the problem. Pressure is. When pressure is removed, thinking becomes reflection. Reflection is calm. It doesn't rush you. In English, people often soften these moments with phrases like, I'm giving myself time. I'm figuring things out slowly. I'm allowing myself to pause. These sentences don't explain everything. They don't need to. They simply state where you are. And sometimes saying where you are is more important than knowing where you're going. Being lost doesn't mean you're failing. It often means you're listening to something inside that no longer accepts automatic choices. That's not weakness. That's awareness. And awareness changes things quietly. You don't notice it in one day. You notice it over time. In how you speak, in how you choose, in how you stop forcing yourself forward. English, when used like this, becomes a tool for honesty, not to impress, not to explain, but to allow yourself to exist where you are. And that's a powerful place to be. When you stay in this in-between space for a while, you start noticing something new. The fear slowly changes. At first, fear sounds loud. What if I make the wrong choice? What if I waste time? What if I regret this later? But later, fear becomes quieter, more thoughtful. It sounds like, I don't want to rush anymore. I don't want to choose something just to feel safe. And that's an important shift. In real life, people don't always admit this. They don't say, I'm afraid of choosing the wrong future. They say, I'm being careful. I want to be sure. I don't want to rush into anything. These sentences sound calm, but inside them is awareness. Awareness that once you move forward, you don't want to move blindly. Being lost often means you've stopped accepting easy answers. You've stopped choosing things just because they look good from the outside. And that takes courage. You might notice that your tolerance for noise becomes lower, for meaningless conversations, for things that don't feel true anymore. This can feel uncomfortable. You might think, why do I feel disconnected? Why do I need more space than before? But this is part of change. In English, people express this softly. I'm more selective now. I need things to make sense to me. I'm choosing differently these days. These are not dramatic statements. They are quiet decisions. Another thing that happens when you feel lost is that you become more honest with yourself. You stop pretending you're fine when you're not. You stop forcing motivation when your body needs rest. And rest is not laziness. Rest is listening. Listening to what you can't hear when everything is loud. That's why quiet moments matter. That's why English like this matters. Because it mirrors real inner life, not perfect sentences, not confident speeches, but pauses, hesitation, simple truth. When you hear English used this way, you don't feel pressure to perform. You feel permission. Permission to say, I don't know yet. I'm still thinking. I'm allowing myself time. These sentences don't close doors. They keep them open. And when doors stay open, possibilities don't disappear. They wait. Being lost is not the end of direction. It's often the beginning of a more honest one. And honesty takes time. You're not behind. You're not late. You're paying attention. And that changes everything. Slowly, quietly, but deeply. There is another moment that comes after you've been lost for a while. It's the moment when you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and you start asking, "What is this trying to tell me?" That change is quiet, but it's important. Before, being lost feels like a problem, something to fix, something to escape. But later, it begins to feel like information. You start noticing patterns. You notice what drains you, what feels heavy, what no longer fits. And you also notice what feels calm, what feels honest, what feels simple. In real life, people don't always explain this clearly. They don't say, "I'm learning about my boundaries." They say, "I don't enjoy that anymore. That doesn't feel right for me. I need something different." These sentences are not dramatic, but they are powerful. They show that someone is listening to themselves. Another quiet realization appears. I don't need to have everything figured out to move forward. This realization changes how you act. You stop waiting for certainty. You stop waiting for confidence. You allow small steps. In English, this sounds like, "I'll try and see. I'll take it step by step. I'll start small." These are realistic sentences. They don't promise success. They don't promise clarity. They promise movement. And movement doesn't have to be fast to be meaningful. When you feel lost, fast decisions often come from fear. Slow decisions come from awareness. And awareness grows when you give yourself space. That's why silence matters. That's why pauses matter. That's why listening matters. Listening to English like this mirrors listening to yourself. You're not rushing to respond. You're not filling every gap. You're allowing things to settle. Another quiet thought appears in this stage. I don't need everyone to understand my choices. This thought brings relief. You realize that some decisions are personal. They don't need explanation. They don't need approval. In real-life English, people protect this space with phrases like, "It's something I need to do for myself. I've thought about it a lot. This feels right for me." These sentences are calm. They don't argue. They don't defend. They simply state truth. And truth doesn't need to be loud. Being lost teaches you how to listen to yourself, to your reactions, to your energy. And that skill stays with you long after clarity returns. Because clarity does return. Not all at once. Not suddenly. It returns quietly, through small choices, through honest language, through patience. You don't notice the exact moment it arrives. One day, you just realize you're not as lost as before, and that's enough. After some time, something subtle begins to change. You don't suddenly feel confident. You don't suddenly feel certain, but you feel less tense. The questions don't disappear, but they stop hurting. You notice that you're no longer fighting the feeling of being lost. You're allowing it, and that changes how it feels. At this stage, people often notice small shifts. You might think, I don't panic like I used to. I don't need answers right now. I'm calmer with not knowing. This calm doesn't come from solutions. It comes from acceptance. In real life, people don't say, I have accepted uncertainty. They say, I'm okay with where I am right now. I'm taking things as they come. I'm not stressing about it anymore. These sentences sound simple, but they show inner stability. Another important change happens here. You stop asking, what should I do with my life? And you start asking, how do I want to feel in my life? That question is quieter, but much more powerful, because feelings guide decisions better than fear. You might notice yourself choosing differently, not what looks impressive, not what sounds safe, but what feels honest. In English, people express this with very natural phrases. I want something that feels right. I want my life to feel lighter. I'm choosing peace over pressure. These sentences don't need explanation. They don't need approval. They come from clarity that grew slowly. Another quiet realization appears. I don't need to rush my life to prove anything. This thought is freeing. You realize that rushing was never about speed. It was about fear of being judged, fear of being left behind. When that fear softens, your pace becomes your own. Learning English works the same way. When you stop trying to prove progress, language becomes easier. You stop forcing words. You stop judging mistakes. You listen. You notice. You absorb. And absorption is powerful. You may not remember exact sentences from this episode, but you will remember how it felt. Calm, grounded, honest. That feeling changes how you approach language and how you approach life. Because learning is not only about knowledge, it's about trust. Trusting that growth happens, even when you don't see it clearly, even when you feel unsure, even when you feel lost. Being lost was never the problem. Ignoring yourself was. And now you're listening. That's where things begin to change. There comes a point when being lost no longer feels like standing still. It starts to feel like movement without noise. Nothing big is happening on the outside. No dramatic changes. No clear announcements. But inside, something is shifting. You begin to trust yourself a little more. Not because you suddenly have answers, but because you stop fighting the questions. You might notice yourself saying things like, I'll handle it when it comes. I don't need to know everything today. I can deal with this step by step. These sentences don't sound powerful, but they are. They come from experience, from surviving uncertainty, from staying present even when things felt unclear. Another quiet change appears in how you speak to yourself. Before, your inner voice may have sounded sharp, demanding, critical. Now it softens. You think, it's okay to feel unsure. I'm doing what I can. I'm learning as I go. This is not giving up. This is maturity. In real life, people rarely talk about this stage because it doesn't look impressive. There is no big success story, no clear result to show. But internally, it's one of the most important moments. It's when you stop running from yourself. You start noticing what actually matters to you, not what you were told should matter, Not what looks good from the outside, but what feels calm, what feels meaningful. In English, this sounds like, I care less about proving myself. I want a simpler life. I want things that feel real. These sentences reflect a shift in values, and values guide decisions more than motivation ever will. Another realization settles quietly. I don't need permission to live my life my way. This thought removes a lot of weight. You don't need everyone to agree. You don't need constant validation. You start trusting your internal sense of direction, even if it's not fully clear yet, even if it's still forming. And this trust changes how you speak. You stop over-explaining. You stop justifying every choice. You say, this feels right to me. I'm comfortable with this decision. I'm choosing what works for me. These are calm sentences. They don't argue. They don't convince. They simply exist. Listening to English used like this helps you internalize that calm. You hear how language can sound grounded, unrushed, secure, not loud confidence, but quiet certainty. And that's the kind of confidence that lasts. You don't arrive at it suddenly. You grow into it. Being lost was part of that growth. It slowed you down. It made you listen. It made you question. And now, without realizing it, you're moving again. Not fast, not dramatically, but honestly. And honesty creates direction. We stay here a little longer, letting that realization settle. When you're ready, we can move gently toward the closing. Just tell me. There is something very important that happens next, and many people don't notice it at first. You stop waiting for a moment to begin. Before, you might have thought, when I feel ready, I'll start. When things are clearer, I'll move. When I'm more confident, I'll decide. But now, readiness feels different. You realize that readiness doesn't arrive suddenly. It grows quietly while you're living. You start doing small things without announcing them, without making promises, without asking for approval. And that's a sign of inner stability. In real life, people don't say, I am finally ready to begin my next chapter. They say, I've been thinking about this. I'm trying something new. I'll see how it feels. These phrases sound casual, but they show movement. Movement that comes from within, not from pressure. Another shift appears in how you relate to time. You stop feeling late. You stop comparing your timeline to others. You understand that life doesn't move in straight lines. Some people move fast, then stop. Some people move slowly, then suddenly change direction. And all of it counts. In English, people express this acceptance with phrases like, I'm on my own timeline. I'm not rushing myself. I'm exactly where I need to be right now. These sentences aren't excuses. They're grounding. They help you stay present instead of anxious. You may also notice that you're less interested in explaining yourself. You don't feel the need to justify pauses, breaks, or changes. You know why you're doing what you're doing. And that's enough. This is where confidence quietly lives. Not in loud statements, not in perfect plans, but in inner permission. Permission to rest, permission to change, permission to take your time. Learning English in this state feels different too. You stop chasing fluency. You stop counting mistakes. You start noticing flow. You understand meaning even when words are missing. You feel rhythm instead of grammar rules. And that's how language becomes natural. Not forced, not controlled, but lived. This is why listening matters more than memorizing. Why familiarity matters more than speed. Because language, like life, settles slowly. You don't force it to stay. You let it become part of you. At this point, being lost no longer feels like a problem to solve. It feels like a phase you pass through. And now, you're somewhere else. Not fully arrived. Not completely certain. But grounded. And grounded is enough to move forward. We stay with this feeling a little longer, letting it settle naturally. When you're ready to move toward the ending, just tell me. Eventually, you notice that your thoughts sound different. They are not louder. They are not more positive. They are simply clearer. You no longer repeat the same questions over and over. You don't circle around the same doubts. Instead, your mind becomes quieter. You think fewer things, but you think them more honestly. This is a turning point because clarity doesn't arrive as an answer. It arrives as less noise. You might notice yourself saying, I don't need to analyze this again. I already know how I feel. I trust this feeling. These sentences are calm. They don't seek reassurance. They show inner alignment. Another important shift appears here. You stop waiting for permission from people, from circumstances, from the future. You realize that permission was never external. It was always internal. In real-life English, people express this softly. I've decided to listen to myself. I'm choosing what feels right. I'm okay with this decision. These are not dramatic declarations. They don't need applause. They mark quiet commitment. At this stage, even uncertainty feels different. It no longer feels threatening. It feels neutral. You understand that not knowing everything doesn't mean something is wrong. It simply means life is still unfolding. And unfolding doesn't need force. You also begin to notice that your attention changes. You are less drawn to chaos, less interested in constant stimulation. You value simplicity, silence, routine, small moments. In English, this sounds like, I enjoy simple things now. I like calm environments. I don't need much. These sentences reflect maturity, not boredom, not emptiness, but depth. When you reach this point, being lost is no longer part of your identity. It's part of your story, something that shaped how you listen, how you choose, how you speak. You don't rush forward anymore, but you don't stay still either. You move gently, intentionally, and that's when direction feels natural, not imposed, not forced, just aligned. This is where many people unknowingly begin a new chapter, not with excitement, not with fear, but with quiet certainty. And that certainty doesn't need to be explained. It simply guides you. We're very close to the final phase now. When you're ready, tell me, and I'll guide us gently into the ending. At this stage, something else becomes clear. You no longer feel the need to become someone else. You no longer feel that pressure to reinvent yourself completely. Instead, you begin to return to yourself, to what feels natural, to what feels honest, to what feels quiet but true. You realize that many of the things you were searching for were not missing. They were simply covered by noise. Noise of expectations, noise of comparison, noise of rushing. When that noise fades, you notice what remains. Your preferences, your pace, your values. In real life, people don't say, "I have returned to my authentic self." They say, "I feel more like myself lately. I'm more comfortable with who I am. I don't feel the need to pretend anymore." These sentences show something important. They show relief. Relief comes when you stop trying to match an image that was never yours. You may notice that you speak more simply now. You choose words that feel natural. You don't decorate your thoughts. And that simplicity feels freeing. In English, this sounds like, "I'll say it directly. I'll keep it simple. This is how I feel." Simple language reflects clarity of thought. Another quiet change appears in your body. You breathe more deeply. You hold less tension. You don't rush through moments. You allow pauses. Pauses are powerful. They show presence. They show confidence without effort. That's why listening to English spoken slowly matters. It teaches your nervous system that there is no emergency, no need to hurry, no need to prove anything. Language becomes a place of rest. And when language feels safe, learning becomes effortless. You're not memorizing. You're absorbing. You're not translating. You're understanding. This is how English becomes part of you, not as a skill, but as a space where you can think, where you can feel, where you can simply be. At this point, the feeling of being lost has transformed completely. It no longer feels like absence of direction. It feels like awareness of choice. You know you can move, but you also know you don't have to rush. You trust timing. You trust process. And most importantly, you trust yourself. This trust doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It quietly supports you. And that is enough. We stay here just a little longer, letting this settle gently. When you're ready for the final closing, tell me, and we'll end this journey softly, the same way it began. There is one more quiet shift that happens when you've spent enough time listening instead of forcing. You stop trying to control outcomes. Not because you don't care, but because you understand something important. Control was never the source of safety. Awareness was. You realize that many things worked out in your life, not because you planned them perfectly, but because you stayed open. Open to change, open to correction, open to reality. In real life, people don't usually say, "I've learned to surrender to uncertainty." They say, "I'm flexible. I'll adapt. I'll handle it when it happens." These phrases are grounded. They don't deny difficulty. They accept it. Another thing becomes clear at this point. You don't need to feel confident to move forward. You only need to feel connected to yourself. Confidence goes up and down. Connection stays. When you're connected, you notice signals. You know when to stop. You know when to continue. You know when something feels off. and you respect that information. In English, this sounds like, "This doesn't feel right. I need more time. I'm listening to my intuition." These are not emotional reactions. They are informed responses. And informed responses lead to better choices. You may also notice that you're more patient with other people now. You understand that everyone is moving at their own pace, that everyone carries something invisible. You stop expecting perfection from others and from yourself. That softness changes how you speak. You use gentler words. You allow silence. You don't rush to fill space. This is real-life communication, not polished, not scripted, but present. Listening to English like this helps you internalize that presence. You learn how calm speech sounds, how grounded pauses feel, how meaning can exist without pressure. And that's why people stay. Not because of tricks, not because of excitement, but because something here feels real, familiar, safe. You're not being pulled forward. You're being accompanied. And that makes all the difference. We're almost ready to close this journey, not with an ending, but with a sense of completion. When you're ready for the final part, just say the word. You've been listening without effort, without trying to remember, without pushing yourself to understand everything. And that matters because this is how language settles, quietly, naturally, without pressure. English doesn't need to be forced. It doesn't need to be chased. It stays when it becomes part of your life. What you heard today was not a lesson, not rules, not explanations. You heard real language, real rhythm, real pauses. The kind of English people use when they're not thinking about grammar, when they're tired, when they're honest, when they're just being themselves. And that's the goal. Not perfect sentences, not fast speech, not sounding impressive, but familiarity. Familiarity is powerful. It's what makes language feel normal instead of foreign, safe instead of stressful. You may not remember every phrase from this episode. You don't need to. What stays is the feeling, the sound, the calm. And that calm is where learning happens. You can come back to this space whenever you need it. When your mind is busy, when you feel overwhelmed, when you want English to feel simple again. You don't have to do more. You don't have to try harder. Just listening is enough. This is English Unlocked. Real life English, spoken slowly and clearly. I'm Natalia. Thank you for staying. Thank you for listening. And thank you for giving yourself this quiet moment. If this episode felt good, you can listen to other episodes on the channel. We'll continue together, calmly, naturally, at your pace. Before you go, take one more slow breath. There's nothing you need to remember right now. Nothing you need to repeat. Nothing you need to fix. Just notice how English feels after listening. A little closer. A little more familiar. That's progress. If you want to keep this feeling, you can listen to another episode on the channel. Each one is created to become slow and real. And if this episode helped you relax or focus, please subscribe to English Unlocked. It helps the channel grow, and it helps us keep learning together. I'd also love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. When do you usually listen to English? Before sleep, in the morning, or during the day? Your answer helps me choose the next episodes. We'll continue gently, without pressure, at your pace. See you in the next episode.